The buzzards circled overhead when Hannah Preston opened her swollen eyes and realized her husband was dead. She lay in the tall grass of a valley somewhere in the California wilderness, her body screaming with pain from places she could not yet catalog. The wagon had overturned 2 days ago, or was it 3? Time had become a blur of heat and thirst and little Emily's frightened cries. Hannah turned her head with effort, panic surging through her chest, until she spotted her daughter sitting in the shade of the destroyed wagon, holding her rag doll and singing softly to herself. The child was 4 years old, too young to understand that her father would never wake up again. Hannah tried to move, but her left leg sent lightning bolts of agony through her entire body. The bone was broken, she knew that much. When the wagon had rolled down the embankment after the wheels snapped, she had been thrown clear, but Thomas had not been so fortunate. He had been crushed beneath the heavy frame, killed instantly. At least he had not suffered. That was the only mercy in this nightmare. They had been traveling from Nevada to the California gold fields near a small mining camp called Skidoo in the spring of 1878, hoping to stake a claim and build a new life. Thomas had been so certain they would strike it rich. Now he lay beneath a pile of rocks Hannah had managed to cover him with using her good leg and her arms, working for hours while Emily watched with wide, uncomprehending eyes. It was not much of a burial, but it was all she could manage. The water was gone. The canteens had shattered in the crash, and the little stream they had been following had disappeared into the rocky ground. Hannah's lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue thick in her mouth. Emily had stopped asking for water yesterday. That terrified Hannah more than anything else. When a child stopped asking for what she needed, it meant she was starting to give up. Hannah closed her eyes against the merciless sun. She had tried to fashion shelter from the broken wagon boards, but moving was agony, and she could barely drag herself across the ground. They were going to die here. The realization settled over her like a heavy blanket. No one knew their route. Thomas had been secretive about their plans, worried that claim jumpers might follow them. Now that paranoia would cost their daughter her life. A hawk called somewhere in the distance. Hannah forced her eyes open again and looked at Emily. The little girl's face was sunburned despite Hannah's best efforts to keep her shaded. Her blonde curls were matted with dust, and her lips were as cracked as Hannah's own. But she was still singing, still clutching that doll, still alive. Hannah would not let her die. She refused to accept it. With a grunt of determination, she began dragging herself toward Emily, using her elbows to pull her body across the ground. Every inch was torture, but she kept moving. She had to reach her daughter. She had to hold her one more time. It took nearly an hour to cross the 20 feet that separated them. By the time Hannah reached the shade of the wagon, she was gasping for breath and tears were streaming down her face. Emily looked at her with solemn eyes. "Mama," she whispered, "are we going to heaven like Papa?" Hannah pulled her daughter close, cradling her against her chest. "No, baby, no, we are going to be just fine. Someone will come, someone will find us." But even as she said the words, she knew they were lies. No one was coming. This valley was remote and wild, miles from any settlement. They had not seen another soul for 3 days before the accident. The trail they had been following was barely a trail at all, just a rough track Thomas had found on an old map. Hannah held Emily and sang to her, the same lullaby her own mother had sung when Hannah was small. Her voice was cracked and harsh, but Emily nestled against her and gradually fell asleep. Hannah kept singing even as her vision began to blur, even as the world started to fade around the edges. She sang until she could not remember the words anymore, and then she simply hummed, and then even that became too much effort. The sun was setting when she heard the hoofbeats. At first, She thought she was hallucinating. The fever had been rising for hours, and she had been seeing things that were not there, shadows that moved like people, her mother's face appearing in the clouds. But the sound of hooves on stone was persistent, growing louder. Hannah forced her eyes open. A rider was coming down into the valley, moving slowly on a big roan horse. Hannah tried to call out, but her voice would not work. She tried to wave, but her arm would not lift. She could only watch as the horse picked its way carefully down the rocky slope, the rider sitting easy in the saddle, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the setting sun. He had not seen them yet. He was going to pass right by. Desperation gave Hannah strength she did not know she possessed. She grabbed a piece of broken wagon board and slammed it against the wheel hub. The sound rang out across the valley, sharp and clear. The rider's head turned. He pulled up on the reins and the horse stopped. For a long moment nothing happened, and Hannah thought perhaps she had imagined it all. Then the rider nudged his horse forward, angling toward the overturned wagon. As he drew closer, Hannah could make out more details. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn jeans and a faded blue shirt, a gun belt slung low on his hips. His face was shadowed by the hat, but she could see the line of his jaw, rough with several days of stubble. He moved with the casual grace of someone who had spent most of his life in the saddle. When he was about 30 feet away, he dismounted in one smooth motion and approached on foot, his hand near his gun. Cautious, smart. This was dangerous country, and a broken wagon could be a trap for the unwary. "Hello, the wagon," he called out. His voice was deep and rough, but not unkind. Hannah tried to respond, but only a croak came out. The rider heard it, though, and his pace quickened. He came around the side of the wagon and stopped short when he saw them. "Jesus," he breathed. He dropped to one knee beside them, his eyes taking in Hannah's broken leg, Emily's small form curled against her mother, the grave of rocks nearby. "How long have you been here?" "3 days," Hannah managed to whisper. "Maybe 4. Water." He was already reaching for the canteen on his belt. "Easy now," he said, supporting her head as he brought the canteen to her lips. "Just small sips, not too fast." The water was the most beautiful thing Hannah had ever tasted. She wanted to gulp it down, but he controlled the flow, giving her just enough to wet her mouth and throat. After a few sips, he pulled the canteen away and turned his attention to Emily. "She alive?" he asked, and there was real concern in his voice. "Yes. Please give her water." He gently lifted Emily from Hannah's arms. The little girl stirred and whimpered but did not wake. He tipped water carefully into her mouth, and Hannah watched as her daughter swallowed reflexively. After a few moments, Emily's eyes fluttered open. "Who are you?" she asked in a small voice. "Name is Zachary Jordan," he said quietly. "I am here to help. Can you drink a little more water for me?" Emily nodded, and he gave her another careful drink. When he was satisfied that she was stable, he set her down gently on a blanket he pulled from his saddlebag and turned his attention back to Hannah. "That leg is badly broken," he said, examining it with surprising gentleness. "This is going to hurt, but I need to set it before I can move you. Do you understand?" Hannah nodded. She had known this was coming. "Do what you have to do." Zachary looked at her for a long moment, and she got her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she had first thought, probably in his late 20s, with angular features and eyes the color of slate. There was a hardness to him, the look of a man who had seen too much too young, but there was kindness there too. She could see it in the way he looked at Emily, in the careful way he touched Hannah's leg. "I am going to give you something to bite on," he said, pulling a rolled leather strap from his saddlebag. "This is going to be bad." She took the strap between her teeth and nodded. He moved to her broken leg, and she saw him take a deep breath, steadying himself. Then his hands were on her leg, and the world exploded into white-hot agony. Hannah must have passed out because when she opened her eyes again, the stars were out and a small fire was burning nearby. She was lying on a bedroll, her legs splinted with branches and strips of cloth. Emily was asleep beside her, wrapped in a blanket, and Zachary Jordan was sitting by the fire, stirring something in a small pot. He looked up when he heard her move. "You are awake. Good. I was starting to worry." Hannah licked her cracked lips. "How long was I out?" "Couple hours. The sun just set." He poured whatever he had been cooking into a tin cup and brought it over to her. "Broth. You need to get some food in you, both of you." The broth was thin, but it tasted like heaven. Hannah sipped it slowly, feeling strength beginning to return to her body. When she had finished half the cup, Zachary took it back and gently woke Emily, coaxing her to drink as well. "Where are you from?" he asked as he worked. "Nevada. We were heading to the goldfields near Skidoo. My husband thought we could make our fortune there." Hannah's voice caught. "His name was Thomas." Zachary glanced at the pile of rocks. "I am sorry for your loss. The wagon wheel broke. We went down the embankment. He died right away." "And you have been here alone since then with a broken leg and a small child." It was not a question. Zachary shook his head slowly. "You are either the toughest woman I have ever met or the luckiest, maybe both." "I do not feel lucky. You are alive. In this country that counts for something." He settled back by the fire. "We are about 2 days' ride from Skidoo if we take it slow, and we will have to take it slow with your leg. I can rig up a travois for you and the girl to ride on." "Why are you helping us?" The question came out before Hannah could stop it. Zachary was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I lost someone once," he said finally. "My wife. She died giving birth to our son. The boy only lived 3 days. He looked up at Hannah and there was old pain in his eyes. "That was 5 years ago. I have been riding alone ever since. When I saw your little girl lying there, I just thought about my son and what might have been." Hannah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I am so sorry. It was a long time ago." He stood up and moved to check on the horses. "You both should sleep. We will leave at first light. The sooner we get you to a doctor, the better." Hannah wanted to thank him, wanted to tell him that he had saved their lives, but exhaustion was pulling her under again. She reached out and took Emily's hand, feeling her daughter's small fingers curl around her own. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. She woke several times during the night. Each time she opened her eyes, Zachary was there, keeping watch. Once she saw him standing at the edge of the firelight, his hand on his gun, staring out into the darkness. Another time he was sitting beside Emily, adjusting her blanket with a gentleness that made Hannah's heart ache. This man who had lost everything was protecting them with a fierce dedication that spoke of depths she could not yet fathom. Morning came with a wash of pink and gold across the eastern sky. Zachary already had coffee boiling and more broth warming. He helped Hannah sit up and eat, then tended to Emily, who was more alert this morning and asking questions. "Are you a cowboy?" Emily asked, watching Zachary with wide eyes. "I suppose I am, in a manner of speaking. I run cattle when I can find work. Other times I do whatever needs doing." He smiled at her, and Hannah was startled by how it transformed his face. "What is your name, little miss?" "Emily Marie Preston. I am 4 years old. Do you have a horse?" "I do." "His name is Red, on account of his color. Would you like to meet him?" Emily nodded eagerly. Zachary carried her over to where the big roan was grazing and let her pat the horse's nose. Red was gentle with the child, nuzzling her hand and making soft sounds that delighted Emily. While they were occupied, Hannah took stock of their situation. The sun was bright, but not yet hot. Their water supply was replenished from Zachary's canteens. He had already salvaged what he could from the wagon and packed it on his horse. and he had built a travois, two long poles lashed together with rope and canvas stretched between them. It looked sturdy enough to carry both her and Emily. Zachary noticed her looking. "I know it does not look like much, but it will get you to Skidoo. Red is strong enough to pull it." "I trust you," Hannah said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. This stranger had appeared when all hope was lost and had asked for nothing in return. If that was not worthy of trust, she did not know what was. They set out an hour later, Zachary riding his horse with the travois dragging behind. Hannah lay on the canvas with Emily nestled beside her, both of them shaded by a blanket Zachary had rigged up as a sunshade. The motion of the travois was jarring but bearable, and Hannah was grateful just to be moving, to be leaving that valley of death behind. Zachary set an easy pace, stopping frequently to give them water and check on Hannah's leg. He talked as they traveled, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the country they were passing through. He spoke of mines that had played out, ghost towns that had flourished and died in the space of a year, outlaws who had hidden in these very hills. His voice was soothing, and Hannah found herself listening intently, glad for the distraction from the pain. Emily, for her part, was enchanted with their rescuer. She asked him endless questions, and he answered each one with patient good humor. He taught her the names of plants they passed, showed her how to identify animal tracks, and told her funny stories about a mule he had once owned who had been smarter than most people. As the day wore on, and the sun climbed higher, Hannah studied Zachary Jordan. He moved with the economy of motion that came from hard experience, never wasting energy, always aware of his surroundings. His clothes were worn but clean, his gear well maintained. This was a man who took care of what he had, who respected the harsh demands of this country. But there was more to him than competence. She saw the way his shoulders tensed when Emily laughed, as though the sound caused him both joy and pain. She saw how carefully he avoided looking at Hannah for too long, as though afraid of what he might see or feel. This was a man still carrying wounds, still mourning losses that should have healed by now. They stopped for the night in a shallow canyon where a spring provided fresh water and some scrub trees offered shade. Zachary helped Hannah off the travois with infinite care, settling her on a bedroll and propping her injured leg on his saddlebag. He cleaned the wound and changed the bandages, his touch professional and detached. "It is healing well," he said. "No infection that I can see. That is good. The doctor in Skidoo should be able to set it properly." "You have medical training?" Hannah asked. "No formal training. But when you spend years on the trail, you learn things. I have set bones, stitched wounds, treated fevers. You do what you have to do to survive." While Zachary cooked their meager dinner, Emily explored the area around their camp, collecting pretty stones and talking to herself. Hannah watched her daughter and felt a wave of love so intense it was almost painful. They had come so close to losing everything. If Zachary had not ridden through that valley, if he had taken a different path or passed by just an hour earlier or later, she and Emily would be dead now. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know I have said it before, but I need to say it again. You saved our lives." "I will never be able to repay you for that." Zachary looked uncomfortable. "You do not owe me anything. Anyone would have done the same. No, not anyone. Most people would have taken what supplies we had and left us. Some would have done worse." She met his eyes steadily. "You are a good man, Zachary Jordan." He looked away, his jaw tight. "You do not know me well enough to say that. I know enough." They ate in silence after that, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Hannah did not understand what she had said to upset him, but she could see that she had struck a nerve. Later, as she lay under the stars with Emily sleeping beside her, she heard him moving around the camp, restless and troubled. The second day of travel was harder. Hannah's leg was throbbing steadily, and she could feel fever starting to build in her body despite Zachary's optimistic assessment. She tried to hide it, not wanting to slow them down, but Zachary noticed everything. By midday, he had increased their pace, pushing Red harder than he had the previous day. "We need to get you to that doctor," he said when she asked about the change. "The infection is starting. I can see it in your eyes." Hannah wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Her head felt fuzzy and her skin was hot to the touch. Emily was frightened, clinging to her mother and crying softly. Hannah held her as best she could, trying to be strong, trying not to show her fear. The hours blurred together. Hannah drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find Zachary giving her water, sometimes hearing his voice low and soothing as he talked to Emily. Once she opened her eyes and saw him carrying her daughter on his shoulders, pointing out an eagle circling overhead. Emily's laughter rang out clear and bright, and Hannah thought it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. When she next woke, it was to the sound of voices. She forced her eyes open and saw buildings around them. They had reached Skidoo. The town was rough and raw, a collection of wooden structures and canvas tents perched on a hillside. Miners and prospectors moved through the dusty streets, going about their business with the focused intensity of men chasing dreams of gold. Zachary was guiding Red through the chaos, his voice sharp as he cleared a path. "Where is the doctor?" he called out to a passing miner. "Up the hill, blue tent next to the assay office," the man replied, barely glancing at them. Zachary urged Red forward. Within minutes, they were pulling up outside a large blue tent with a hand-painted sign that read, "Dr. William Carson, physician and surgeon." A man emerged from the tent, wiping his hands on a stained apron. He was middle-aged with graying hair and the weary look of someone who had seen too much suffering. His eyes went immediately to Hannah on the travois. "Broken leg and fever," Zachary said without preamble. "She has been out in the valley for 4 days. I set the leg as best I could, but it needs proper attention." Dr. Carson was already moving, calling out orders to someone inside the tent. 2 men appeared and carefully lifted Hannah onto a stretcher. She tried to keep hold of Emily, but her fingers would not obey her. "I will take care of your daughter," Zachary said, and there was a note of command in his voice that brooked no argument. "You just focus on getting well." They carried Hannah into the tent and the world became a confusion of pain and voices. She felt hands examining her leg, heard the doctor's calm instructions, smelled the sharp tang of carbolic. Then something was pressed over her nose and mouth and everything went dark. When Hannah woke, the first thing she saw was canvas overhead. She was lying on a proper bed with clean sheets, her leg immobilized in a heavy plaster cast. The pain was still there, but it had receded to a dull throb. Her head felt clearer than it had in days. "Emily," she croaked, trying to sit up. "Easy now," Dr. Carson's voice came from her left. He moved into view, pressing her gently back onto the bed. "Your daughter is fine. She is with Mr. Jordan. He has been taking excellent care of her." Relief flooded through Hannah. "How long have I been asleep?" 2 days. The infection was worse than I thought. I had to clean the wound thoroughly and reset the bone. It was a bad break, Mrs. Preston, but you should heal well with time and rest. He poured water into a glass and helped her drink. "You are a very lucky woman. Another day or 2 out there and we would be having a very different conversation." "Where is Zachary?" "Where is my daughter?" "Mr. Jordan has rented a room at the boarding house. He brings your daughter to visit several times a day. In fact, they should be here soon. It is nearly noon." As if summoned by his words, the tent flap opened and Emily rushed in, her face lighting up when she saw Hannah awake. "Mama!" Zachary was right behind her, his hand steadying Emily as she tried to climb onto the bed. He looked tired, Hannah thought, with dark circles under his eyes and lines of strain around his mouth. "Hello, sunshine," Hannah said, hugging her daughter close. "Have you been good for Mr. Jordan?" "She has been perfect," Zachary said quietly. He stayed by the entrance as though uncertain of his welcome. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thanks to you." Hannah looked at him over Emily's head. "Dr. Carson tells me you have been taking care of Emily. She is no trouble," he cleared his throat. "I should let you rest. Emily and I will come back this evening." "Wait." Hannah did not want him to leave, though she could not have said why. "Please stay for a few minutes. I want to talk to you." Zachary hesitated, then moved closer. He pulled up a stool and sat down, his hat in his hands. Emily immediately climbed down from the bed and went to him, showing him a drawing she had made. "I drew red," she announced proudly, holding up a paper covered in wobbly lines. "That is the finest picture of a horse I have ever seen," Zachary said seriously, examining it with great attention. "We should frame it." Emily giggled and Hannah felt something warm unfold in her chest. This man who had been alone for 5 years, who had lost his wife and child, was so gentle with her daughter. She saw the pain in his eyes when he looked at Emily, but there was something else too, something that looked almost like hope. Dr. Carson returned then, shooing Zachary and Emily out so Hannah could rest. But before he left, Zachary looked back at her and their eyes met. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Hannah rested and healed, growing stronger each day. Zachary and Emily came to visit in the mornings and evenings, and gradually Hannah learned more about the man who had saved them. He had grown up in Texas, he told her, the son of a rancher. He had met his wife, Margaret, when he was 20 and married her within a year. They had been happy, building a life together, dreaming of the family they would have. Then Margaret had gotten pregnant and everything had fallen apart. The labor had been difficult and long. Margaret had died of blood loss hours after the baby was born. The baby, a boy Zachary had named James, had been too weak to survive. He had lived for 3 days before passing away in his father's arms. After that, Zachary had sold the ranch and left Texas, unable to stay in a place that held so many memories. He had drifted through the territories for years, taking work where he could find it, never staying in one place for long. He had been on his way to a ranch job in Oregon when he had ridden through that valley and found Hannah and Emily. "I think Margaret sent me to you," he said one evening as they sat outside the doctor's tent, watching Emily play in the dust. "I know that sounds foolish, but I cannot shake the feeling that I was meant to find you." Hannah looked at him, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "I do not think it sounds foolish at all. I think maybe you are right." Their eyes held and Hannah felt her heart beat faster. She had been a widow for less than 2 weeks. It was too soon to feel what she was feeling, too soon to imagine a future that included anyone but Emily. But she could not deny the pull she felt toward Zachary Jordan, the way her whole body became more alive when he was near. Zachary must have felt it too because he looked away abruptly, his jaw tight. "I should go. Emily needs dinner." "Zachary." Hannah reached out and caught his hand. "Do not run away from this." "From what?" His voice was rough. "You are a widow with a child and a broken leg." "I am a drifter with nothing to offer. What future do you see for us?" "I do not know yet, but I know that I feel something when I look at you, and I think you feel it too." He pulled his hand away gently. "What you feel is gratitude, nothing more. You are wrong." Hannah met his eyes steadily. "I am grateful, yes, but this is not gratitude." Zachary stood up, calling for Emily. The little girl came running, chattering about the pretty stones she had found. He took her hand and walked away without looking back, and Hannah watched him go with a mixture of frustration and longing. "Doctor." Carson came out and sat down beside her. "That is a good man," he said quietly. "I know. He is also a man who has been hurt badly. He built walls around his heart to protect himself. It will take time and patience to get through them." Hannah looked at the doctor. "How do you know so much about it?" "I lost my own wife 10 years ago. I know what it is like to be afraid of caring again, afraid of losing someone else. It took me a long time to learn that the risk is worth it, that a life without love is not really living at all." He patted her shoulder. "Give him time, and do not give up." Hannah took his words to heart. Over the following days, she made an effort to show Zachary that what she felt was real. She talked to him about her life before Thomas, about her dreams and hopes and fears. She asked him about his time in Texas, about Margaret and baby James, giving him space to grieve and remember. And slowly, gradually, she felt the walls between them start to crumble. Emily helped too, in her innocent way. She adored Zachary and made no secret of it, following him everywhere and insisting that he read her stories and play games with her. One evening, Hannah watched as Emily fell asleep in Zachary's arms, her head on his shoulder, and saw the naked longing on his face. He wanted this, she realized. He wanted a family again. He just did not know if he was brave enough to reach for it. 3 weeks after they arrived in Skidoo, Dr. Carson declared Hannah well enough to leave his care. Her leg was healing nicely, and she could get around with the help of crutches. She would need to take it easy for another month or two, but she was no longer in danger. The question was, what would she do now? She had no money, no husband, no prospects. The goldfields were no place for a woman alone with a child. She needed to find work, find a way to support herself and Emily. Zachary solved the problem in typical direct fashion. "Come with me," he said the evening before she was to leave the doctor's tent. They were sitting outside, watching the sun set over the hills. Emily was asleep inside, worn out from a day of playing. Hannah looked at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "Come with you where?" "I took that job in Oregon. The ranch owner is looking for a cook and housekeeper. I told him I knew someone who might be interested." He did not look at her, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It would give you a place to stay, work to do, and Emily would have other children to play with. The owner has 3 kids of his own." "Zachary." Hannah did not know what to say. "That is very kind, but I cannot accept charity." "It is not charity. It is a job. You would earn your keep." Finally, he looked at her, and she saw uncertainty in his gray eyes. "Unless you do not want to be around me, I would understand if that is the case. Do not be a fool." Hannah reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I want to be around you. You know I do." "Then say yes. Come to Oregon with me. Give us a chance to see where this goes." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was rubbing gentle circles on her palm. This man had saved her life, had protected her daughter, had shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. And somewhere along the way she had fallen in love with him. "Yes," she said softly, "I will come with you." The relief on his face was profound. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that it made her heart ache. "I cannot promise you an easy life," he said. "I do not have much to offer, but I will work hard and I will take care of you and Emily. I promise you that." "I do not need promises," Hannah said. "I just need you." He kissed her then, a soft, gentle kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. They left Skidoo a week later, giving Hannah time to regain her strength and for Zachary to outfit them properly for the journey. He bought a gentle mare for Hannah to ride and a small pony for Emily, and loaded his supplies carefully, making sure they had everything they needed. The journey to Oregon took nearly 3 weeks. They traveled slowly, camping under the stars and taking their time. Zachary taught Emily to ride properly, spending hours walking beside her pony and correcting her posture with infinite patience. He hunted for their food, catching rabbits and quail and once a small deer. And every evening, after Emily was asleep, he and Hannah would sit by the fire and talk for hours. They talked about everything and nothing. Hannah told him about growing up in Ohio, about her father who had been a school teacher, and her mother who had died when Hannah was 12. She told him about meeting Thomas at a church social, about how he had courted her with flowers and poetry, about how the reality of marriage had been so different from her girlish dreams. He was not a bad man, she said one night, staring into the flames, but he was not a good husband either. He had big dreams and no patience for the work it took to achieve them. He moved us from place to place, always chasing the next opportunity, never content with what we had. I think he loved the idea of being successful more than he loved Emily and me. Did you love him? Zachary asked quietly. Hannah considered the question honestly. I thought I did when we married, but over the years that love faded into something else. Duty, maybe, habit. By the time we left Nevada, I did not love him anymore. I am not sure he loved me either. We were just two people trapped in a marriage neither of us wanted. I am sorry. Do not be. It was not all bad. He gave me Emily and she is the best thing in my life. Hannah looked at Zachary. What about you and Margaret? Were you happy? Very. His voice was soft with memory. She was the kindest person I ever knew. She saw the good in everyone, even when there was not much good to see. She made me want to be a better man. He paused. When she died, part of me died too. I thought I would never feel anything again. But you do feel things now. He looked at her, and there was such naked emotion in his eyes that it took her breath away. Yes, I feel far too much when I am around you. Hannah reached out and took his hand. That is not a bad thing. It is terrifying, I know, but you cannot live your whole life afraid of being hurt. You have to take chances, Zachary. You have to let yourself feel. He pulled her closer and kissed her, deeper this time, full of all the longing and fear and hope that swirled between them. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. I am falling in love with you, he said roughly. God help me, I am falling in love with you. Good, Hannah whispered, because I am already in love with you. After that night, something shifted between them. They were still cautious, still careful, especially around Emily. But there was an understanding now, an acknowledgement that they were building toward something real and lasting. Emily, with the uncanny perception of children, seemed to sense the change. Are you going to marry Mama? She asked Zachary one afternoon as they rode side by side. Zachary nearly fell off his horse. What makes you ask that? Because you look at her the way Papa used to look at his whiskey, like you need her. Hannah, riding behind them, tried not to laugh at Zachary's expression. Your Papa drank whiskey, Zachary asked carefully. All the time. Mama did not like it. They argued about it a lot. Emily patted her pony's neck. I like you better than Papa. You do not yell and you are nice to Mama, so I think you should marry her. It is not that simple, little one. Why not? If you love someone, you should marry them. That is what the Bible says. Zachary looked back at Hannah, his eyebrows raised. She shrugged, still trying not to smile. Her daughter had no idea how complicated she was making things. That evening, after Emily was asleep, Zachary brought up the conversation. She is right, you know. If we are going to do this, we should do it properly. I should marry you. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. Are you proposing? I suppose I am. He took her hand. I know it is fast. I know you have not been a widow very long, but I love you, Hannah Preston. I love Emily too. I want to be a family, a real family. Will you marry me? Hannah looked at this man who had come into her life like a miracle, who had saved them and protected them and loved them. Thomas had been dead for barely a month. By all social conventions, she should wait at least a year before even thinking about remarriage. But social conventions had never served her well. She had followed the rules and married a man her family approved of, and she had been miserable for years. Life was too short and too uncertain to let opportunities slip away. She knew what she felt. She knew what she wanted. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in a small settlement in Northern California by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Emily was their only witness, standing beside them in her best dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers Zachary had picked that morning. The ceremony was simple, just a few words spoken under a cloudless sky, but it meant everything. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Emily cheered and threw her wildflowers in the air, and Hannah laughed through her tears, happier than she had ever been in her life. They reached the ranch in eastern Oregon in late July of 1878. It was a sprawling operation nestled in a green valley, with cattle grazing on the hills and horses in the corrals. The owner, a weathered man named John Mitchell, greeted them warmly and showed them to the small cabin that would be their home. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a loft, but it was clean and sturdy and it was theirs. Hannah stood in the doorway and felt something settle in her chest. After years of wandering, after the nightmare of the valley and the uncertain weeks that had followed, she finally had a home. Zachary came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "I think it is perfect." Emily was already exploring, running from room to room and exclaiming over every discovery. She found the loft and declared it her room, then found the small garden plot behind the cabin and announced that she wanted to grow flowers. Over the following weeks, they settled into their new life. Hannah took over the cooking for the ranch hands, preparing hearty meals 3 times a day. It was hard work, but she found she enjoyed it, enjoyed the satisfaction of feeding hungry men and hearing their appreciation. Zachary worked with the cattle, riding out before dawn and often not returning until after dark. But no matter how tired he was, he always had time for Hannah and Emily, always made sure they knew they were loved. Emily thrived in the ranch environment. She made friends with John Mitchell's children and spent her days playing in the sunshine, helping with small chores, and learning to ride better on her pony. The shadows that had haunted her after her father's death gradually faded, and she became the bright, happy child she was meant to be. For Hannah, those months were a revelation. She had never known that marriage could be like this, full of quiet joy and mutual respect. Zachary was everything Thomas had not been. He was steady and reliable, always keeping his word. He was gentle and patient, never raising his voice in anger. And he was passionate, showing her a side of physical love she had not known existed. They talked about everything, sharing their days and their thoughts and their dreams. Zachary told her he wanted to save enough money to buy a small piece of land, to build a ranch of their own someday. Hannah shared her dream of having more children, of giving Emily brothers and sisters to grow up with. "I want that too," Zachary said one night as they lay in bed, Hannah's head on his chest. "I want a house full of children. I want noise and chaos and love. Everything I lost with Margaret and James, I want to have again with you." Hannah tilted her head up to kiss him. "Then let us start working on it." He laughed, a sound of pure happiness that never failed to warm her heart, and proceeded to do just that. Autumn came, and with it the first frost. The ranch prepared for winter, bringing the cattle down from the high pastures and stocking up on supplies. Hannah preserved vegetables from her garden, and made jams and pickles that filled the cabin with wonderful smells. Emily started attending school in the nearby town, riding there each morning with the Mitchell children, and coming home full of stories about what she had learned. It was a good life, simple and honest and full of love. Hannah had never been happier. And when she realized in late October that she was pregnant, her joy was complete. She told Zachary that evening after Emily had gone to bed. He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, and Hannah felt a flutter of fear. What if this brought back too many painful memories? What if he could not bear the thought of going through it all again? Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Hannah asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy? I am over the moon." He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "You have given me everything, Hannah. A second chance at life, at love, at family. I never thought I could be this happy again. You have given me those things too. We saved each other." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And Hannah knew that everything they had been through, all the pain and loss and struggle, had been worth it to bring them to this moment. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and cold winds. Hannah's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Zachary hovered over her like a mother hen, constantly worried that she was doing too much or not eating enough. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from a place of love and fear. Emily was thrilled about the prospect of a baby brother or sister. She helped Hannah prepare the small room next to theirs as a nursery, making curtains and painting pictures to hang on the walls. She talked constantly about all the things she would teach the baby, all the games they would play together. "I will be the best big sister," she declared one evening at dinner. "I will protect the baby and never let anything bad happen." Zachary reached over and ruffled her hair. "I know you will, sweetheart." Spring came late to eastern Oregon that year, but when it finally arrived it was glorious. The valley burst into bloom and the cattle grew fat on the new grass. And in early April, on a warm, sunny day, Hannah went into labor. Zachary was beside himself with worry. He sent for the doctor from town and paced the cabin like a caged animal while Hannah labored. John Mitchell's wife, Sarah, stayed with her and helped her through the contractions, offering calm encouragement and cool water. The labor was long but not overly difficult. As evening approached, Hannah felt the baby coming. With one final push, she brought new life into the world. "It is a boy," Sarah announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Zachary appeared in the doorway, his face pale and anxious. "Hannah." "I am fine," she said, exhausted but elated. "Come meet your son." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the baby from Sarah with shaking hands. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect features, the dark hair, the little fists waving in the air. "Hello, son," he whispered. "I am your papa." Hannah watched him cradle the baby with such tenderness, such awe, and felt her heart overflow with love. This was what he needed, what he had been denied for so long. A chance to be a father, to raise his child and watch him grow. "What should we name him?" she asked. Zachary looked at her, then back at the baby. "What do you think about Matthew? It means gift from God." "Matthew Jordan." Hannah smiled. "I think it is perfect." Emily was allowed in a few minutes later, and she approached the bed with wide, wondering eyes. She looked at her baby brother with a mixture of fascination and uncertainty. "Can I hold him?" she asked. Zachary helped her sit on the edge of the bed and carefully placed Matthew in her arms. Emily stared down at him with absolute concentration, her young face serious. "Hello, Matthew," she said softly. "I am your big sister Emily. I am going to take care of you forever and ever." The baby yawned and Emily giggled. "He is so small." "Was I ever that small?" "You were," Hannah confirmed. "And you were just as beautiful." Over the following weeks, they settled into the rhythm of life with a newborn. Matthew was a good baby, sleeping well and eating eagerly. Emily was a devoted big sister, always wanting to help with feedings and diaper changes. And Zachary was a natural father, completely unafraid of the tiny infant, handling him with confident gentleness. Hannah watched her family and felt blessed beyond measure. A year ago she had been dying in a wild valley, certain that she and Emily would never see another sunrise. Now she had a husband who adored her, a healthy baby son, and a home filled with love and laughter. Summer passed in a blur of joy and activity. Matthew grew strong and healthy, reaching all his milestones right on schedule. Emily finished her school year at the top of her class and spent her days helping on the ranch and playing with her brother. And Zachary worked hard, saving money toward his dream of their own ranch. One evening in late August, he came home with news. "John knows of a piece of land for sale about 10 miles from here. It is not big, only about 200 acres, but it has good water and grazing. The owner is willing to sell for a reasonable price." Hannah looked up from the stew she was stirring. "Can we afford it?" "With what I have saved and what we can borrow, yes. It would be tight for a while, but we could make it work." He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What do you think? Are you ready to be a ranch wife?" "I am ready for anything as long as I am with you." They bought the land in September and spent the fall building a house. It was small but sturdy, with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen. John Mitchell and his ranch hands helped with the construction, and by the time the first snow fell, they were ready to move in. Standing on the porch of their new home, looking out over land that belonged to them, Hannah felt a sense of peace she had never known before. This was what she had dreamed of without even knowing it. A place to belong, a family to love, a future full of promise. Zachary came out to join her, carrying Matthew in his arms. The baby was almost 6 months old now, smiling and babbling and reaching for everything. Emily was inside, arranging her belongings in her new room and singing to herself. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, sliding his free arm around Hannah's shoulders. "I am thinking about how lucky we are, how blessed." She leaned into him. "A year and a half ago I thought my life was over. I was lying in that valley waiting to die, and then you rode in and changed everything." "You changed my life too. I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to live again, to feel again, to hope again." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Hannah Jordan. I love you too." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Hannah thought about everything that had led them to this moment. The tragedy and loss, the pain and struggle, the long, hard journey from death to life. It had all been necessary, she realized. Without the darkness, they never would have found each other. Without the valley, Zachary never would have ridden by. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best. Sometimes we have to be broken before we can be made whole. And sometimes, just when we think all hope is lost, a lonely cowboy rides by and changes everything. Emily called from inside, wanting help with something. Matthew started to fuss, ready for his dinner. The ordinary demands of family life pulled them back inside, back to the warmth and light and love that filled their home. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. Zachary proved to be an excellent rancher, building up their herd through hard work and smart management. Hannah became known throughout the territory for her cooking, and travelers would often stop by just to sample her pies and bread. Emily grew into a capable young woman, helping with the ranch work and caring for her younger siblings, because there were more children. Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace when Matthew was 2, and then twin boys, Samuel and Daniel, 3 years after that. The house was always full of noise and chaos and laughter, exactly the way Zachary had wanted it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Hannah back to the valley where he had found her. It was the first time she had been back since that terrible day. She stood at the spot where the wagon had overturned and looked at the pile of rocks that marked Thomas's grave. "I should hate this place," she said quietly. "But I do not. This is where my new life began. This is where I met you." Zachary took her hand. "Do you ever regret it, leaving behind your old life, marrying me so quickly?" "Never, not for a single moment." She turned to face him. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zachary Jordan. You and our children, our life together. I would not change any of it." He kissed her then, long and deep, and when they pulled apart, both of them had tears in their eyes. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, their horses moving easily through the familiar landscape. When they crested the last hill and saw their home spread out below them, lights glowing in the windows and smoke rising from the chimney, Hannah felt that familiar swell of gratitude and love. Emily was on the porch, Matthew beside her. Grace and the twins were playing in the yard, their voices carrying on the evening air. This was her family. This was her life, and it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. Zachary seemed to know what she was thinking. "We did good, did we not? We did better than good. We did amazing." They rode down the hill toward home, toward the life they had built together from ashes and loss, toward the future that stretched bright and promising before them. And Hannah thought about that terrible day in the valley, about lying there certain she was going to die, about the sound of hoofbeats that had meant salvation. Sometimes one moment changes everything. Sometimes one person makes all the difference. Sometimes, against all odds and all reason, love finds a way. She had been alone with a child and left for dead in a wild valley. Then a lonely cowboy had ridden by, and neither of them had been alone ever since. The children came running when they saw their parents approaching, voices raised in excitement, wanting to tell them everything that had happened while they were gone. Zachary dismounted and swept Grace into his arms while Matthew took the reins of his horse. Emily hugged Hannah tight, already talking about the dinner she had prepared. Inside the house, the table was set and food was warming on the stove. The family gathered together as they did every evening, holding hands while Zachary said grace. Hannah looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and felt her heart swell with thanksgiving. After dinner, they sat together in the parlor. Zachary read to the children from a book of adventure stories while Hannah mended clothes and Emily worked on her embroidery. The fire crackled in the hearth, and outside the wind whispered through the pines. It was an ordinary evening, peaceful and unremarkable, the kind of evening they had shared hundreds of times before. But to Hannah, it was extraordinary. Every ordinary moment was extraordinary when you had faced death and been given a second chance. Every quiet evening was a miracle when you had lost everything and found it again in a new and better form. Later, after the children were in bed, Hannah and Zachary sat together on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Zachary pulled Hannah close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, content and at peace. "Tell me something," Zachary said after a long, comfortable silence. "If you could go back and change things, prevent the wagon from overturning, save Thomas, would you?" Hannah thought about it carefully. "I would want to spare Emily the trauma of losing her father. I would want to spare Thomas the pain of dying. But would I change what happened to me, to us? No. I would not. even knowing what you would have to go through, even then, because it brought me to you and you are worth everything." She tilted her head to look up at him. "What about you? If Margaret had lived, if your son had survived, you would have had the life you planned. Would you choose that over this? I loved Margaret and I will always mourn what we lost. But I love you too, Hannah. I love the life we have built, the children we have made together. I do not think I could choose between them. I am just grateful for what I have now." "That is a good answer." He kissed her softly. "I learned from the best." They sat there for a while longer, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars wheel overhead. And Hannah thought about the winding path that had led them here, about all the choices and chances and coincidences that had to align perfectly for them to find each other. If the wagon wheel had not broken on that particular stretch of road, if Thomas had been more careful, if Zachary had taken a different route, if he had passed through the valley an hour earlier or later, if he had been the kind of man who would have left them to die. Any one of those things could have changed everything, but they had all happened exactly as they needed to happen. The wagon had broken. Thomas had died. Zachary had ridden through at exactly the right moment, and he had been the kind of man who could not leave a woman and child to die in the wilderness. Some people would call it fate. Others would call it providence. Hannah did not know what to call it. She just knew that she was grateful every single day for the twist of chance that had brought Zachary Jordan into her life. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. They added onto the house as the family grew. They bought more land and increased their herd. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle rustlers and market crashes. Through it all, they held fast to each other and to the love that had been forged in a wild valley on a desperate day. Emily grew up and married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named William who reminded Hannah of Zachary in all the best ways. She gave them grandchildren, 3 boys who spent their summers on the ranch and learned to ride and rope from their grandfather. Matthew followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled rancher who eventually took over the day-to-day operations. Grace surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school for the children of ranch families scattered throughout the territory. Samuel and Daniel became partners in a freight business, hauling goods between the towns and settlements. Through it all, Hannah and Zachary remained the center that held everything together. Their love, tested and proven through hardship, only grew stronger with time. They were partners in every sense of the word, working side by side to build not just a ranch but a legacy. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full to bursting with family, 3 generations all together. As Hannah looked around at all the people who had come from her union with Zachary, she was overwhelmed with the magnitude of what they had created. If she had died in that valley, none of these people would exist. Matthew, Grace, Samuel, Daniel, all the grandchildren who filled her home with joy. Their lives, their futures, all of it hinged on Zachary riding through when he did. During the celebration, Emily stood up to make a toast. She was 30 now, a mother herself, but Hannah could still see traces of the frightened 4-year-old she had been. "I want to thank my mother and Zachary," Emily said, raising her glass. "Most of you know the story of how they met, how Zachary saved us when we were left for dead. But what you might not know is how Zachary saved us in all the days that came after. He gave us a home and a family and a love that I use as a model for my own marriage. He gave my mother a reason to smile again. And he gave me a father, a real father, one who chose to love me even though he did not have to." Tears streamed down Emily's face and down Hannah's too. Zachary stood and pulled Emily into a hug, and Hannah saw him whisper something in her ear that made her laugh through her tears. Later that night, After everyone had gone to bed or headed home, Hannah and Zachary walked out to the porch one more time. It had become their habit over the years, this quiet time together under the stars. 25 years, Hannah said, shaking her head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you rode into that valley. Other times it feels like a different lifetime. It was a different lifetime. We were different people then. Zachary pulled her close. Broken people trying to survive, and look at us now. Look at us now, he agreed. Happy, whole, surrounded by love. They stood there in comfortable silence, and Hannah thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments both big and small. She thought about the first time Zachary had kissed her, about the day they were married, about the births of their children and the marriages of their daughters. She thought about the quiet evenings and the busy days, the laughter and the tears, the struggles and the triumphs. Every bit of it had been worth it. Every moment had brought them closer together, deepening the bond between them until it was unbreakable. You ever think about what happens next? Hannah asked. When we are gone and our children take over? Sometimes. But mostly I just think about now, about making the most of every day we have together. Zachary kissed her temple. I wasted too many years after Margaret died, just going through the motions. I will not waste a single moment with you. Good. Because I plan to keep you around for a very long time. He laughed, and the sound was still as warm and wonderful as it had been 25 years ago. I am not going anywhere, Hannah Jordan. You are stuck with me. Best news I have heard all day. They went inside eventually, back to the bed they had shared for a quarter century. And as Hannah drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the life she had been given, for the second chance she had never expected, for the love that had saved her in every way a person could be saved. The years continued their steady march forward. Zachary's hair turned from brown to gray to white, and Hannah's face acquired lines that spoke of laughter and love. Their bodies grew older, but their hearts remained young, still beating in sync the way they had from the very beginning. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a large and growing family. Their grandchildren had children of their own, and the ranch became a gathering place for the entire extended family. Every summer there was a big celebration, everyone coming together to reconnect and remember where they came from. At one of these gatherings, when Hannah was in her 60s, one of her great-grandchildren asked her to tell the story of how she met Zachary. Hannah looked at her husband across the yard, watching him show one of the young boys how to throw a lasso, and smiled. We met in a valley, she began, and the children gathered close to listen. I was in a very dark place, the darkest I had ever been. I thought my story was over. But then your great-grandfather rode by on his horse, and everything changed. She told them about the broken wagon and the days waiting to die. She told them about Zachary appearing like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. She told them about the journey to Skidoo and the slow building of trust and love. But the real story, she said, looking at all the young faces watching her with rapt attention, is not about being saved from death. It is about being saved for life. Zachary gave me a reason to live again, to hope again, to love again. And in return, I gave him the same thing. We saved each other. That is so romantic, one of the teenage girls sighed. It is, Hannah agreed, but it is also true. Real love is not just about feelings. It is about choosing each other every single day, even when it is hard. It is about building a life together, one moment at a time. That is what your great-grandfather and I have done for all these years. We have chosen each other, and we have built this. She gestured around at the ranch, at the family gathered together, at the legacy they had created. All of this started with one man on a horse, riding through a valley at exactly the right moment. Never underestimate the power of one kind act, one moment of compassion. It can change everything. The children dispersed eventually, running off to play, but Hannah stayed where she was, lost in memory. Zachary came over and sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Telling stories again?" he asked with a smile. "Someone has to make sure they remember where we came from. They will remember." How could they forget? He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, the same gesture he had made so many years ago. "You are unforgettable, Hannah Jordan. So are you." They sat together in the warm sunshine, surrounded by the sounds of family, and Hannah felt a deep contentment settle over her. This was what it all came down to in the end. Not wealth or fame or grand achievements. Just love. Just family. Just the knowledge that you had made a difference in the world, that your life had mattered. She had been saved by a lonely cowboy in a wild valley, and in turn she had saved him. Together they had built something beautiful and lasting. Together they had created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And when the time came, many years later, for them to take their final rest, they went together, within hours of each other, neither willing to be parted from the other for long. They were buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates that bracketed their long lives together. But their real memorial was not made of stone. It was in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried on their legacy. It was in the ranch that still bore the Jordan name. It was in the stories passed down through generations, tales of love and courage and second chances. It was in the knowledge that one moment, one choice, one act of kindness had changed the course of countless lives. That a lonely cowboy, riding through a wild valley on a spring day in 1878, had stopped to help a woman and child left for dead, and in doing so, had found his own salvation. Some stories end in tragedy. Some end in triumph. This one ended in love, which is perhaps the best ending of all, because love is what makes us human. Love is what gives life meaning, and love is what endures long after everything else has faded away. In that wild valley where it all began, where death had seemed certain and hope had nearly died, wildflowers bloomed every spring. The old wagon was long gone, reclaimed by the earth and the elements. Thomas's grave had been lost to time, the rocks scattered by wind and weather. But the memory remained. And on quiet evenings, if you knew where to look and how to listen, you could almost hear the echo of hoofbeats, the sound of a lonely cowboy riding by at exactly the right moment to change two lives forever. And if you believed in such things, you might imagine that it was not chance at all, but something greater, something that knew a woman and child needed saving and a lonely man needed a family to love. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Out of tragedy came triumph. Out of death came life. Out of loneliness came love. And from a wild valley in California came a family that would endure for generations. All because one man chose kindness over indifference, compassion over convenience, love over fear. That was the legacy of Hannah Preston Jordan and Zachary Jordan. That was the story that would be told and retold for as long as there were people to remember them. Not a story of perfection, but of perseverance. Not a story of ease, but of earned happiness. Not a story of fate, but of choice. They chose each other in that valley. They chose each other on the journey to Oregon. They chose each other every day of their long marriage, and in choosing each other they created something that would last forever: love, family, home, hope, the things that matter most, the things worth saving, the things worth fighting for. And it all started with a lonely cowboy, riding through a wild valley, who heard a woman's desperate cry for help and decided to stop. Who saw a child who needed protecting and a woman who needed saving and chose to be the answer to prayers he could not hear. Zachary Jordan rode into that valley alone and rode out with his future. Hannah Preston went into that valley expecting to die and came out ready to live. And Emily, just 4 years old and unaware of how close they had come to losing everything, gained a father and a family and a life full of love. 3 broken people, brought together by circumstance and bound together by choice. Building a life one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. Until those days stretched into years and those years into decades and those decades into a lifetime. A lifetime built on the foundation of one man's kindness and one woman's courage. A lifetime that proved that it is never too late for a second chance, never too late for love, never too late to find the happiness that seemed lost forever. As the sun sets on this story, as it sets so many times over the Jordan Ranch, we leave them in peace, happy, whole, surrounded by the family they built and the love they shared. Their story had a beginning in darkness, but it had a middle full of light and an ending wrapped in the warm glow of a life well lived. And that, in the end, is the best any of us can hope for. To love and be loved. To build something that lasts. To make a difference in the world, even if that world is just one small valley, one broken wagon, one woman and child left for dead, until a lonely cowboy rode by, and everything changed. Forever.